In this video, we will be doing an introduction to Ruby. The Ruby language is most known for the framework Ruby on Rails. However, having a sound knowledge of the Ruby language that Ruby on Rails runs on will really make things easier for you as a developer in the future. And before we get into the content, I want to give a shout out to Scout APM for sponsoring this video. Scout APM makes it easy to track down bugs within your code, such as N+1 queries, memory bloat, and other performance-related issues. If you want to try out a 14-day free trial, check out the link in the description below. This video will assume that you already have Ruby installed, but if you do not have Ruby installed yet, you can visit the link in the description. I'll include a link to this page, but there are multiple ways to install Ruby, but the quick way is just to paste these lines into your terminal. You can also download from the Ruby language website, and they have downloads available for different operating systems. If you want to try out Ruby without installing it on your computer, you can visit the Ruby website and click on the Try Ruby in your browser link. Here you can type code directly into the editor and click the Run button to test it out, and you will get the response in real time. So once you have Ruby set up, we will open up the terminal and we'll run IRB. The command IRB gives us an interactive Ruby shell to work with. So once we're in here, we will just type out a string of text. So in this case, I'm wrapping it in quotation marks, and you can see that the response is just returned back to us. So this is a default for the shell. It will automatically return the result of what we input. In Ruby, if we want to output a line of text or a response to the console, we use the puts command, which is short for put string. So puts will also be able to perform calculations in line. In this case, we do 2 + 2 and we get 4. And when we want to exit the Ruby shell, we just type the word exit and return. If you already know other programming languages, then the syntax will not be too different for you. So what happens if we want to save a piece of data to a variable? So by default, typing the words hello here, this is forgotten after we submit it. But if we want to assign it to a variable, we just type out a name for it, followed by the equal sign. And if we wrap our text in quotation marks, it becomes a string. So in this case, we've assigned a variable name of name, and that name will respond with a value of John. When working with numbers in Ruby, it's very simple to perform calculations. So in line, we can add numbers, subtract, multiply, and we can use brackets to dictate which order a calculation is performed in. So we've looked at strings of text, and we've looked at integers. So full numbers are known as integers. But what happens if we add two different data types together? So in this case, we're trying to add an integer and a string. And you'll see here that it gives an error that a string can't be coerced into integer. So another example is if we add two strings together. And in this case, what happens is we have concatenation, string concatenation. So it pushes the two strings together and we have the combined string output in the console. The next thing we will look at is arrays. Arrays are useful for storing more than one piece of data, so you may have multiple values to store in an array. And in Ruby, we define an array using the square brackets. So this is similar to other programming languages. And within this array, we use commas to separate the entries. In this case, I'm going to put 3 strings in this array. And the nice thing about using arrays in Ruby is that we can call a method for retrieving the first entry in an array. We can say names.first, and we'll get the first value. I can also say names.last, and we can even pass in a number. So the number will be the index in the array. And you'll notice here that I've put in the number 1, and that pulls the middle value. In Ruby, much like other programming languages, arrays are 0 indexed. So using the 0 will give us the first entry in an array. And if you want to add values to an array, we can do that using the 2 less than arrows. It's a quick way to add onto the end of an array. And if we want to take the last item off an array, so remove the last item in the array, we can use the .pop method, and it returns that value here as Martin. And if you run the array again, you'll see that it is now being removed. And we can also push items to an array. And when working with arrays, it's important to be able to loop over the data in the array. And in Ruby, we can do that using the name of the array followed by .each. So we'll say names.each, and then we use the word do, names.each, do, and then we pass in the value from the array. We'll give it a name of name. So that will be the item in the array that at that point when it's looping over it. So in this case, I'm going to output it using the puts command. So we'll say puts name, and I'm going to add the words hello in front of this. So we'll add a string before the name. And we can close off a block of code using the end keyword. And we can see the result here from looping over each item in the array. Another nice thing we can do in Ruby with arrays is to reverse the sorting order, and there's a command specifically for that. So in this case, we're going to say words.reverse, and we can see that the words in this array have now been reversed in order. We can also take an array and join it together to make a string, and for that we use the .join method. You can also pass in a value to the join method. In this case, I'll pass in a space to make it a proper sentence. In Ruby, you can use typecasting to change a variable from one data type to another. So let's take a look at a scenario where this may be required. In this example, I'm adding a string to an integer. And in this case, we get an error because Ruby doesn't know how to add these two items together. So what we need to do is change or cast to a different type of data. We can cast a value to a string using the .to_s method. And we can also use another method to change our integer to a float. So if we use a .to_f, that will give us a float value. And finally, we can also change to an integer value. There are more typecasting methods available, but these would be the most frequently used. When we want to check the type of data that we are using, we can use a method called is_a. So we can say variable name.isA, and then we use a question mark, and then we pass in the data type into this method. So this will either return a true or false value, depending on the type of data we're checking against. And we can also just return the name of the class using the .class method. So in this case, we have a string. Another approach to mixing data types is to use string interpolation, and this allows us to input a number or a value such as a float within a string, and we do this using the syntax of hashtag and two curly braces, and then within that we put our variable name. And we could do this with multiple values in the same string if we wanted to. But in order for string interpolation to work, we need to use double quotation marks. When working with strings of text, we can check how many characters are within that string using the .size method. We can also check to see if a string contains any text, and we have a .empty method for that. We can also break a string into an array using the .split method, and by default it will use the space character to split that string. We can also use the .size method on an array to get how many items are in the array. And the nice thing is that Ruby allows us to chain these commands together. So in this case, we've got the split method followed by the size method. Next, we will look at creating a method in Ruby. To create a method in Ruby, we need to define it first, and we use the abbreviation DEF to create a method, and we will pass in two variables, so the name and the age, and these can be comma separated. As you can see here, I'm not using parentheses. We can create a method with or without parentheses, so it's really up to yourself, but I prefer to not use them. So I'm taking the two values that we have passed into this method, and I will use string interpolation to output those values. And finally then, to close a method, we use the end keyword. And then we just type the name of the method followed by the values that we want to pass into it. In Ruby, we can make use of classes to help structure our code. And we'll create a new class here called person. When creating a class, we need to start with an uppercase letter for the name of that class. And within our class, we can include a initialize method. Now, if you've used PHP before, the initialize method is very much like the constructor method in PHP. So this initialize method gets called once the class is instantiated, and we can pass in values to this method and set them so that they are accessible throughout the class. And we can use an alias in front of a variable name, and this creates an instance variable. So I'm creating an instance variable for name and another one for age. So let's close this method. And we'll create a new method here called details. And this details method will be used to output a string of text containing the name and age that we pass into this class. And again, here we are using string interpolation to output our variables, but in this case we're using the instance variable with the alias. So now let's close off this method and finally close off the class. In Ruby, we create an instance of that class using the .new method. However, in this case, we can see that we are expecting to input two values. So this is our name and our age. So let's try this again with our values. And this time we'll assign it to a variable. And we can see here that our name and our age has been assigned to this instance of the person class. And now if we call our variable name .details, we'll get the message returned containing the name and the age. And we can also create new instances of this class and assign it to different variable names. And we can see that both of these instances contain their own sets of data. So now let's try something different. Up until now we've been using the interactive Ruby shell, but this time let's create a file. So I've created a new file called person.rb. So Ruby files end with the extension .rb, and I'm opening it now in my code editor. So I put in the exact same code here for this class, but this time we're going to ask the user a question first. And then we will prompt the user to input their name. So this can be done in the terminal. They will input their name, and we can grab the value of that name using the gets command. And we will introduce a new method here called chump. So you can run .chump on a string to remove line breaks. And by default, when we use the gets command in this way, we do get a line break along with the response by the user. .chump just removes that and gives us the exact piece of text that they entered. So we're doing the same thing here for the age, asking for the age. And then finally we'll call a person.new and pass in these two values. And we will assign that to a variable called person. And then we can call person.details to output the data that comes back from that class. So that will output the final string containing user details. And it looks like I've made a typo in the initialize method. So now we can go ahead and try this out in the terminal. To run a Ruby file in terminal, we use the word Ruby followed by a space and the name of the file. And now we've got our prompt asking us what is our name. So that string is output first, and then it's waiting on the value from us. And then the next string is output. So let's put in our age, and then we can see both values being output as part of that string. So that's going to do it for this crash course in Ruby. Hopefully you guys have found this helpful, and if you have, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more Ruby and Ruby on Rails content. And I also want to give a big shout out to my sponsor for this video, Scout APM. Scout makes it easy to debug your application to remove N+1 queries, performance issues, and much more. Check out their link in the description and get a 14-day free trial. But other than that, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.